In this current political climate, you cannot be neutral. You need to take a stance on many issues, even if they're issues that you just don't care about and have no opinions on. In this current political climate, if you're gonna do business, you need to please a very specific type of crowd by taking a stance on your politics. I have referenced this video many times, and this video talks about an article and many instances where Ubisoft and other developers were being egged on by ideologues who want their games to take a political stance. We are seeing this trend constantly in game criticism in that game developers should use their games as a megaphone for a certain political agenda, something that veteran game writers like Chris Avallone disagreed with, and also Reggie from Nintendo.
Making political statements are for other people to do. We want people to smile and have fun when they play our game.
I really miss him. There's more update to the story, by the way. Here's an inside article from Ubisoft talking about balancing player freedom with politics. A Q&A with Tommy Francois, is that how you pronounce it? VP of Editorial. The article starts off by saying that Ubisoft's open world games are often based or inspired by real world people, places, politics, and issues affecting society. While the primary goal is always to entertain, the dev team also understand that their games are in a position to enrich the lives of their players by giving them freedom to make their own choices and form their own opinions. I really like this interview because it shows the right mindset in how developing games should be. This part is talking about how games should take different points of view. This part talks about how giving different points of view is very important in open world games. This part talks about how the things that are written in games should never be taken as endorsement, something that unfortunately a lot of people miss. This part even talks about how the ideas being presented in the game could be misinterpreted and used by people as a justification for wrongdoings in real life, and how it can be used as ammunition for the media to demonize gamers and the gaming community. I don't particularly like the recent Ubisoft games, but I absolutely respect their stance on this. I respect that they still stay persistent in their beliefs, that games should never be a megaphone for a certain political side, and that it should always take a neutral stance. I wouldn't exactly say that it should be apolitical, because you can't remove a lot of the political intrigues in games like Assassin's Creed. It's like the most essential part of the game, but I can say that it should be neutral and not take a modern political stance. But as we have seen many times in the past, this is not enough for ideologues, and today we're gonna take a look at one more. Ubisoft continue to claim their games don't have political stances are still wrong. I don't think they're wrong, writer. I think you're wrong, and here's why. Ubisoft, who make RPGs about a 3,000-year-long battle between freedom and order, FPSs about liberating occupied lands, and military shooters so jingoistic they cause governmental complaints, have been arguing for a long time that their games aren't political. That's not what they're arguing, writer. They're arguing that their games don't take any political side in this stupid culture war. Things might or might not change in Watch Dogs Legion, but Ubisoft knew that being neutral is beneficial for them. Ubisoft knew that being neutral is going to make them more money, and their business, they're there to make money. They might look like that they're taking a side on the surface, but Far Cry 5 and The Division 2 prove that they're not taking any sides, even though they might look like it on surface. And I think that's the reason why the progressives are outright pissed towards Ubisoft. They're straight up baiting them into thinking that their games would be their megaphone for their politics. I don't really know why Ubisoft would bait them in the first place. I guess grabbing their attention is free PR for them, and I suppose negative PR from the progressives is a positive PR for everyone. Except maybe if you're Blizzard. I talk about that in this video. The interview, which you can read in full at Ubisoft's website, is somewhat winding and hard to follow, probably because everything Francois is saying doesn't make sense. Okay, writer, please do elaborate your critique. In summary though, he claims that games should offer a 360-degree view of life, should let people interact with all points of view. That apparently means truly all viewpoints, even if they are dicey, so that players can choose which sides to explore, what they like, what they don't like, and if and how to change their minds or the way they play based on that information. I don't know, writer. That makes sense to me. I mean, we have Fallout New Vegas after all, a game that lets you choose a lot of the morally gray factions in the game. There's nothing wrong with that, and one of the factions straight up endorses slavery. Yes, I know that Fallout New Vegas isn't Ubisoft. I'm just trying to make a point that games that are morally gray or taking a morally gray stance have existed in the past, and they haven't caused much problems in the real world. The Needless to say, Ubisoft games do not actually show all points of view. In fact, the ones they do show are fairly limited. Ghost Recon doesn't present the points of view of the ordinary people local to the diverse, hostile, and mysterious open world that it's set in. Anno 1800 doesn't allow you to explore anything but the teleological march of history, as though it was inevitable that things happen this way, and progress equals victory. These are political stances. Ah, interesting. Let's address them one by one, shall we? Ghost Recon, particularly Wildlands, doesn't provide the point of view of the ordinary people local to the diverse, hostile, and mysterious open world, because that's not their focus. The focus of the game is you playing as soldiers trying to take down the cartel. You know what game that focuses more on the ordinary people? The Far Cry games, especially the recent ones. You are literally part of the people in that world. As for Anno 1800, it's a city building game. The game's natural progression is not a political stance. If that's how you're gonna play it, Ryder, you might as well say that Pokemon endorses slavery and animal abuse. Of course, trying to walk the centrist line is also a stance. It's also the one that usually backfires. For example, what if we explored all sides of slavery, as Assassin's Creed Odyssey tried to last year? Whoops! It turns out that it's very easy to present the monstrous idea that owning human beings is maybe actually okay, as Salavier Nelson Jr. detailed back in November. Yes, it's possible for the game to present the idea that owning human beings is maybe actually okay. That's the point of having multiple different viewpoints. Just because you heavily disagree with them doesn't mean that you are correct that they should be removed. If a game takes place in, say, ancient Greek, when, as far as I know, slavery is a thing, wouldn't it be nonsensical to not portray slavery in the game? But let's continue to see what the writer highlighted. I felt fear, the fear of a black man in a racially divided world, watching a critical topic associated with his cultural and ethnic background be presented with uncritical, ambiguous contentment on the part of the enslaved, fear of how the simplified depiction of slavery presented by a game I genuinely love might be bent out of shape to perpetuate harmful views, consciously or not. In other words, you feel uncomfortable by the idea that the game is presenting. Yes. That's the point. You're supposed to feel uncomfortable. It's the ancient Greek after all. Surely there will be people who are very much okay with slavery at that time, and you're gonna listen to them whether you like it or not, because it makes sense within the historical context of the world that the game takes place in. It's a harsh and brutal place where anything can happen, including slavery. It seems to me that you want Assassin's Creed Odyssey to be critical of slavery, just like how you are critical to slavery. Well, unfortunately, the game is not a megaphone for your politics, writer. The game is trying to present the ancient Greek as accurately as possible. Well, I suppose authentic is a more correct descriptor. There are many things in Odyssey that just straight up requires a huge suspension of disbelief. Going back to the Fallout New Vegas example, the Caesar's Legion is one of the many factions in the game that you can join, and that faction straight up endorses slavery and many other horrendous things. The game allows you to join the faction. I mean, sure, it also allows you to fight against them, but have you ever actually meet someone in real life who sides with the Caesar's Legion and actually endorses slavery to real-world people? It's called a role-playing game for a reason. You are playing a role, and sometimes you might not like it. Deal with it. The moral panic towards entertainment has progressed from video games cause violence in real life to bad ideas in video games cause people to have bad ideas in real life. I'm just amazed by some people's inability to distinguish between fiction and reality. Could we be creating sympathy towards things we know aren't necessarily the best things about society? Asked the unnamed Ubisoft interviewer. Yes, we could, replied Francois. Yes. Again, that's the point of having different worldviews. Your disagreement seems to stem on the fact that people can take the side that you disagree with and use it for their own political gains. Ryder, you don't get to decide on whoever wants to use video games for their own political gains. That's what you're trying to do now. But don't worry, he'll also throw in some really nice buzzwords like immersion and player freedom to comfort you, because apparently it's okay that could happen as long as people are really into the game. Again, Yes, just because you heavily disagree with the other worldview doesn't make it bad. I think I need to put the Atlas disclaimer again. Just because the game presents a worldview doesn't necessarily mean that people at Ubisoft or Atlas or whatever agree with it. And also doesn't necessarily mean that they endorse a certain fringe political group that you don't like. Your criticism is that they have to appeal to just you and not them too.
Trying to play both sides and avoid that some points of view are actually terrible isn't mature. It's toothless. It also leads to messages like, gay people will probably go ahead and have kids with someone of a gender that they're not attracted to, but that conversely let white supremacy off the hook by erasing it entirely from Far Cry 5's Montana.
I talk about that in this video, but I think we pretty much agreed that Ubisoft removing player choice and suddenly making your character having a baby with someone that they don't choose to romance is a really terrible thing. But that's not a message writer. That's a huge blunder from Ubisoft that they apologized and changed, by the way. And they didn't change it because the idea itself is morally terrible, although it is pretty stupid. They changed it because, once again, it dismisses player choice. It's a really bad mechanic. You are taking something that happened and interpret it into something else in order to try to prove a very weak point. As for Far Cry 5, again, I talk about this many times in other videos, you are criticizing Far Cry 5 for not being a white supremacist killing game, and that it should be because it's current year and the rise of the far right is a thing happening far beyond the borders of Montana. Again, these games are not your megaphone for your politics. Stop treating them that way.
Fighting to remain firmly in the bullseye of the status quo isn't just deeply political, it's conservative in and of itself, acting as though everything is just fine.
Wow, apparently not taking any political stance and remain firmly to the status quo is a conservative move. Even if I accept that it is, I don't see what's wrong with it, but then again, I'm not a progressive.
If someone just wants to have fun, let them have fun, Francois adds, as if shooting looters or fighting for resources or building an empire being fun isn't also a message.
Yes. I don't know how else am I gonna explain to you this. If you look at the activities that you do in your video games as a political stance, I'd suggest you to take a break out of politics.
The subtext here is, if you allow me to translate, is we need our games to sell as many copies as possible, and so we won't alienate people who have horrible points of view.
Yes! Yes, Ryder, that's exactly what they're doing! They're not making any political Actually, you know what? That's not the right word to describe it. They're not taking any moral stance. And by moral, I mean your moral stance. Let me ask you this, Ryder. Who are the people in your eyes that have horrible points of view? Isn't that a very subjective characterization? Is it a specific group of people, or is it anyone that you disagree with, which is pretty much everyone? It seems to me that a lot of people are still unable to grasp this very easy disclaimer. The things that happen in the game and the worldviews being presented in the game are not necessarily reflective of the worldview of the people who worked on the game. It goes back to that tweet I talked about in my last video on Cyberpunk 2077. The author's intent doesn't matter because the harmful message is still there. The problem is, how are we going to know which parts in the game that say those harmful messages? What will guarantee these sensitivity readers to get all the messages? And how much of the game should be changed in order to not offend people? Can the game exist at all if it's being neutered into not offending everybody? I understand that the political landscape in current year are incredibly toxic. I understand that there are tons of hostilities that are happening in current year. What I don't understand is the needs of having fictional entertainment to be neutered so that they don't appeal to the people who have horrible points of view. Going back to the elements that you criticized earlier, I assume that the people who have horrible points of view, meaning those who actually endorse slavery in real life, one, how many are there? And two, how many of those will interpret the game as endorsing their worldview? Anyway, I need to move on because this is such a terrible take that I could just go on and on in why it is.
They said as much last year, and while that's not an uncommon position amongst AAA companies, at least most of them have the sense not to resurrect this nonsensical argument every few weeks.
Yeah, you're right. They don't. Most AAA game companies these days focus more on making money and exploiting their consumers with garbage business practices. Ever since Battlefield 5, they figured out that appealing to your types of people don't really make a lot of money, so they just use the direct approach of holding you upside down and shaking you to squeeze every little penny. At least I'm glad that partisan politics in video games is no longer as much of an issue as they were back in the day, because it means that we're going to be talking about the real issues like garbage business practices that actually harm the consumers. Funny thing is, even if we criticize those, people like you are still pissed off. More on that in another video.
Ubisoft are allegedly unveiling a post-Brexit watchdogs in the next couple of days. Here's something I can say about it with complete confidence. It will make a political statement, no matter how much they protest that it doesn't.
To be honest, I don't think so. Now, this article was written days before Ubisoft's E3, so the writer didn't get the chance to see the trailer, but for those of you who haven't seen the trailer, I do want to talk about it for a bit. If you look on the trailer itself, it doesn't look like a game that specifically says, oh, this is what happens right after Brexit. It looks like a generic 1984 dystopian sort of scenario, and you're a bunch of hackers trying to rebel against it using drones and stuff. Nothing explicitly political, or at least partisan, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the game does have partisan politics in there, but Ubisoft has been rather consistent with their games, and by that I mean not explicitly partisan or trying to cater to a certain political demographic. And after game journalists constantly heckled them about Far Cry 5 and The Division 2's lack of partisan politics, I don't really blame them if they just want to focus on making a fun game. And Watch Dogs 3 looks fun, so we'll see how it turns out.